YouTube will not divide us, 'cause I got the hepatitis. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and I kinda stole that joke from one of the people who was trolling Shia LaBeouf pre-mental breakdown when he actually was allowed to have his camera feed set up in New York City, but what fucking ever. Alright, so apparently I picked the wrong week to take at least a month off of drinking because now YouTube is tightening up ship yet again with some sort of AI shadow ban, unlist your video based on subject matter that bugs them, but they won't actually tell you what subject matter bugs them, kind of a thing. Likely so that they can potentially slowly take out channel after channel. Mr. Medicare and Styx Hexenhammer have been rather grim about this type of thing for years, saying that it's inevitably going to lead to some sort of 1984 type of levels on YouTube where nobody can make videos anymore talking about anything besides makeup, cats, and cooking. And yet, they are still uploading videos, and there's been numerous scares. I like these guys' videos, but I have always tried to remain optimistic because I have a tendency to get rather grim in many arenas of my life, and I really don't know what I'd do without YouTube at this moment in my life because I live in a dirty SJW mecca and I hate basically everybody in my entire city and feel like they are all brainwashed. The most positive spin that I can come up with in regards to this is that YouTube is ultimately just coming up with further bark that will probably have little bite to try to scare away certain people, because ultimately I like to think that they do want to make money, and I know that the opinions in the skeptic sphere are ultimately mostly actually not controversial if somebody were to investigate what we are actually saying. For the most part, I'm pretty sure that men's rights advocates and people who criticize feminism do a hell of a lot better of being non-sexist than feminists, both towards men and women. They hate men, they infantilize women. And people who criticize Black Lives Matter tend to be a lot less racist than those who think only white people can be racist. The types of people that are saying things in the skeptic sphere are not saying things that are outlandish in the least. And it can only be so long before the Overton window reveals to the collective zeitgeist of mainstream media consuming leftist America that wildly known feminists like Anita Sarkeesian are serial liars, and leaders of the Women's March like Linda Sarsour are vile, vindictive lunatics. Just look at this op-ed that was published in the New York Times today, where the author was in full support of the Women's March on Washington, but then goes on to highlight Linda Sarsour's comments made towards Ayaan Hirsi Ali, where she mocked her female genital mutilation, as well as the march's leaders' support of unwholesome figures like Asada Shakur and Louis Farrakhan. The left had successfully reprogrammed a lot of the masses within their ranks to live and breathe the most obvious lies, like that females are oppressed in the Western world, where male suicides compose 78% of all suicides, and males compose only 40% of university enrollment, and their only strategy in regards to keeping those lies going is to suppress the speech of anybody who mentioned the truth. Article after article came out calling us all trolls, putting criticisms of Islam into the same category as racism, and putting racism in the same category as advocating for the gender-specific issues of men and boys. And if anybody ever said, wait a minute, this is all crazy talk, there was another article telling these obedient leftists to block that person on social media. And many of them did. But still, week after week, social justice believers self-published articles about having doubts in their overall dogma, often saying that they're no longer leftists. And giant megastars in feminism like Lacey Green have more than delved into hearing the arguments from people with opinions similar to myself and being more than public about agreeing with some of them. So ultimately, There will be countless people who will feel that it's in their best interest to keep up with this facade from the left, and will maybe never admit that maybe they made mistakes. No, Cat Black will probably never apologize to RuPaul about calling RuPaul's hit reality show Drag Race anti-black, even though the accusation was absurd. Anita Sarkeesian will probably never come clean about not being a gamer, stealing people's game playthroughs, getting important gameplay details wrong, and collaborating with whichever the hell politician it was that put her up to telling the United Nations that calling a woman a liar should be considered harassment. And even smaller, more or less culturally insignificant individuals that we might know personally might hold on to the bitter end as long as they can, believing that the slur, mansplaining, is appropriate to insert into conversations every time a man says something that annoys a woman, because you can't be sexist against men, of course. So it doesn't matter how fucking rude these women are to every man around them about the fact that they are male. As if that's a civilized way to speak to anybody. But ultimately, none of this can last forever. And I know this because it's happened before. I remember the 90s very clearly, and I lived in the inner city of Seattle. So I heard all of the same far leftist talking points. We heard the same bullshit about white people being the only people capable of racism, and the same male-bashing nonsense. All of it was popular for a while, until it wasn't. And everybody who was like that either changed their tune and pretended like it never happened, or they simply stopped having friends. When eventually people realized that SJWs are people who see the world through hate-filled goggles. There is legitimately hateful content on YouTube, and stuff that might end up veering more towards hatefulness as the collective consensus of various communities changes ever so slightly month after month. But ultimately, the Overton window around what is acceptable opinion is controlled not by which word choices and buzz phrases are acceptable, but rather which thoughts are generally agreed upon. And provided the evidence, the ideas in the skeptic sphere simply hold a lot more water than the SJW's ideas, because those are really bigoted, and our ideas have gained a lot more traction over the past few years. The giant social and mainstream media propaganda experiment of 2012, launched by the Democratic Party to keep themselves in power, ended up failing, and there is nothing that they can do to keep their bad ideas from continuing to crash and burn. If I even inspired 10 bright minds to become active in challenging the lies of fourth wave intersectional feminist social justice, I've done my part. So all we can do is continue to speak our truths. People often ask me why I keep my identity private, and I never have a super great answer. Each and every individual fear isn't super valid, though there are numerous ones, but ultimately it just leads back to something general, which is something that I've learned from lots of time spent over the years on the internet. If you can, if you know you're going to be attracting a decent amount of attention towards certain opinions of yours, it's always best to stay relatively anonymous online. Not for your own sake so much as if you are afraid of what might happen if somebody were angered by what you were saying, but so that the audience can decide for themselves if they relate to you or not, rather than seeing if your immutable personal traits are things that they share in common. Furthermore, there's a lot of things that I say now that people from my past could probably find ways of saying, "Don't listen to him when he says that. He's a hypocrite. I knew him last decade, and you can trust that he doesn't follow his own advice." They could make a fair case for such things. Because ultimately, my opinions will change again, depending upon both myself and the changing times. But if history has shown me anything, it's that what I was saying a year ago almost always tends to be what people end up saying 2 years later. Because I'm always a little bit ahead of my time because I kind of spend an obscene amount of time analyzing popular culture to the point where it's a fault of mine. At least I have an outlet with YouTube. That's all I can say. So chances are the arguments of the skeptic sphere are going to become more and more popular, and YouTube is over party isn't happening this week either. I'll talk to you soon.